Hello, Thyroid Thrivers, and welcome back to another episode of the Thyroid Healthy Bites podcast, with bi-weekly episodes dedicated to helping you eat well, live well, and feel well. I'm Ginny Mahar, a functional medicine health coach, cordon bleu chef, and your thyroid health and cooking coach. So if you're ready to get inspired, informed, and empowered with thyroid-friendly food and lifestyle topics, expert interviews, and tales from the healing journey, you're in the right place, friend. Let's dig in. Thyroid health is deeply intertwined with our energy levels, and one of the most significant players in this equation is our adrenal function. The connection between the thyroid and adrenals is both profound and scientifically backed, yet many thyroid thrivers don't realize how closely their energy struggles are tied to adrenal health. So today we're diving into this crucial relationship and exploring how to restore balance and vitality with the one and only Dr. Izabella Wentz. Welcome to the show, Dr. Wentz.
Hi, Jenny. It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so wonderful to reconnect. We were just talking before the show. It's been 5 years since I've had you on the show. So I've been really looking forward to reconnecting into this conversation because this is such a huge topic for this community. So I know that there's just going to be so much in this episode for them to glean from. So I appreciate you being here with us to share your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a joy to connect with you.
Always, always a pleasure. So, to share a little bit more about you with the audience, Dr. Izabella Wentz is a compassionate and innovative integrative pharmacist who is laser focused on finding the root causes of chronic health conditions. Her passion for thyroid health stems from her personal journey receiving a Hashimoto's diagnosis in 2009 after years of debilitating symptoms. Dr. Wentz is the author of several best-selling books, including the New York Times bestseller, Hashimoto's Thyroiditis, Lifestyle Interventions for Finding and Treating the Root Cause, the #1 New York Times bestseller, Hashimoto's Protocol, a 90-day plan for reversing thyroid symptoms and getting your life back, and the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Hashimoto's Food Pharmacology, Nutrition Protocols, and Healing Recipes to Take Charge of Your Thyroid Health. Her latest book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol, released in 2023, focuses on resetting the body's stress response with a targeted 4-week program that has helped over 3,500 individuals with a success rate of over 80%. That's amazing. This program has delivered improvements in brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, irritability, sleep, and libido, making it a game changer for anyone struggling with energy and stress. So I've been so excited to have you on the show to talk about this because, when I think about thyroid issues, I always think thyroid issues are energy issues. And the adrenals like weave into that so much. And I think that's a connection that is really prevalent in a lot of people's symptoms. And maybe they don't fully understand that connection. So I'm really looking forward to kind of connecting some of those dots with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times people that I've worked with, and this was my personal journey in the beginning too, is they get started on thyroid meds. And at first they might feel somewhat better. They're like, okay, my energy has improved. But with time, usually within a month or so, maybe 2 months, they'll find that all of a sudden they feel more fatigued and some of their symptoms that they thought were getting better worsen. And a lot of times they'll go back to the doctor and they'll say, okay, I think something's off. Maybe we need to increase my thyroid meds. And in many cases, the thyroid meds are like just fine. They're right at the right level, right? And so one of the reasons why this happens is because when our thyroid gland and our adrenal glands and the hormones they produce, they work together in a beautiful symphony. And so when the thyroid slows down, our body keeps more cortisol around to kind of support ourselves, right? Kind of support the body and support our energy. Now, it's not like the cortisol energy isn't like the best kind of energy. It's not like a clean energy source. It's kind of like the energy if you had 8 cups of coffee. So it's usually like a very anxious and irritable energy, but nonetheless, it helps you get things done, right? And so what happens when people get their thyroid function corrected with thyroid hormones is their cortisol clearance gets corrected too. And what this can mean for a lot of people is that extra cortisol they had sticking around gets cleared out, and this can actually unmask a cortisol deficiency, which is a very common pattern that I see in people with Hashimoto's, with hypothyroidism, with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. A lot of times, people with those inflammatory autoimmune conditions, they actually have a low cortisol pattern. And it's kind of one of those things where, conventional media and everybody talks about like, you have high cortisol, that's bad, let's lower it. And it's like, no, actually, you probably had high cortisol at some point, but your body just was putting out so much cortisol because of inflammation or stress or whatever was going on. And now you're left with a desensitized cortisol pathway. So your body is capable of producing just the right amounts of cortisol, but it's become desensitized. And now it just produces very tiny amounts of cortisol. And low levels of cortisol are, just as bad, if not worse, than high cortisol because we need just the right amount of cortisol to have energy, to have manage inflammation in our body. No matter how our bodies naturally produce inflammation, and we want to keep that in balance. And so we actually need cortisol to live. If we didn't have any cortisol, we would not be alive. And so this is a very common pattern, and I'm excited to share more about that.
Yeah, it's really easy, I think, I think it's just so much part of human nature, I feel like, to want to simplify and categorize things into those good and bad piles. Cortisol is bad because it's a stress hormone, but I always say cortisol is what gets us out of bed in the morning.
Yep.
It's an essential hormone, and a normal cortisol curve kind of spikes in the morning and then sort of tapers off during the day so that by bedtime we can relax and fall asleep, right? So there's all kinds of ways that that curve can get messed up. It can
Discombobulated.
discombobulated. I mean, backwards, flatline, I'm sure you've seen it all, but I'd love to kind of hear, thank you for that, kind of introduction to, cortisol and how that ties into this. I'd love to maybe hear more about your own experience with adrenal dysfunction and what inspired you to write your latest book.
So when I was on my thyroid healing journey, I remember like I was a pharmacist, and I'm still a pharmacist, but I was a very skeptical pharmacist, and I had heard of the term adrenal fatigue. And I just looked it up, and the Mayo Clinic or whoever, I don't know, said that it didn't exist. And I was like, okay, well, this doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. And I was on thyroid meds and trying various things, and I was very, very tired, just exhausted, could barely get out of bed in the morning. And I was like, this is terrible. And so I was able to connect with another pharmacist who mentioned adrenal fatigue. And I was like, okay, well, he's a pharmacist, I'm a pharmacist. Maybe, maybe this isn't just like voodoo, right? And so I ended up doing the test. And sure enough, I had that cortisol curve that was flatlined. So it was an adrenal saliva test where instead of having that cortisol kick in the morning that helps you get out of bed, I was having no cortisol in the morning, which explained why I had such a hard time waking up in the morning. And my cortisol was very low all throughout the day and at nighttime. So I had people are like, oh, maybe you don't sleep enough. And maybe that's why you're tired. I'm like, I'm sleeping so much. I go to bed tired, but I also wake up tired. And that low cortisol flatline curve is sort of the pattern that's associated with that. And so I tried the therapies that are recommended to support cortisol and adrenals. And I was like, wait a minute, this voodoo does work, right? And I actually felt better. And with time, I was able to retest my cortisol levels, and my cortisol curve had normalized. And I was like, okay, this is what it feels like to be like a vibrant human, to wake up in the morning. And I kind of did that. And at the time, I thought it was like a one and done process. And I was able to get my health back. And I started like really shouting like Hashimoto's remission and what to do from the rooftops. And I kind of burned myself out through the process. I created a documentary series, and that was like so many hours of work. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't like doing anything because it was just like 3 to 4 times the amount of work that I thought it would be, right? And so I ended up basically after that point, I knew my adrenals again were not in a good shape. And so I looked through what I can do. And I took like a really intensive approach where I slept for like 12 hours straight for 30 days. I like decommitted from everything and took some hormones and various therapies to get back into balance. And then I was like, got myself back into balance. And then the third time I kind of had an adrenal crash was when my son was born. And I thought like babies, I read this book that said babies can sleep through the night at 3 months old. My son did not read that book. And he was like not on board with this like
Yeah.
thing, right? And so 8 months in, and I'm still like waking up multiple times a night. And I was like, oh, wait, I thought people go back to work and like, I don't know, like there's so much about motherhood that I think society just doesn't really appreciate
Yeah.
unless they go through it themselves or doesn't really understand. And so I ended up again in that um, low cortisol state. And this time, though, I couldn't use any of my strategies. Like I couldn't use the sleep for 12 hours a day and like do nothing for 30 days. Like, I mean, I had a newborn. Like, what was I going to do? Like, go to the Bahamas and be like, here, world, take care of my child for me, right? Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
Um, and then I couldn't take hormones. I was breastfeeding. So I was like, I don't know, like DHEA, like, is it going to give him like chest hair? Like, that's just, I don't know. Like, is he going to grow breasts? Like, we're just not going to go there. And so I started looking at, like just really helpful lifestyle interventions that were like doable for a person with responsibilities and for maybe a person that couldn't sleep as well. And so I just really started focusing in on that. And then I was able to recover my energy within a short period of time. And I was like, huh, this worked out really well. Like, this didn't require me to take hormones, and this didn't require me to like sleep all the time. And I didn't even quit coffee, right? Like, I was still drinking coffee and caffeine. And normally my protocols were like, get off of coffee, do this, do that. And so over the years, I had clients that would do my adrenal protocols and they did great with them. And then they were like ones that would look at me be like, are you effing kidding me? Like I cannot give up coffee. Like I cannot do this. Like I cannot, like you say I should sleep, but like this is why I can't. And so I once I kind of my son was a little bit older, I want to say around 2 or 3, I wrote up everything that I did. And then I created it into a protocol for my community because sometimes with the lifestyle, with like the functional medicine or integrative medicine approach that I was trained in, the results took like 3 months to 2 years. And then this took like 3 weeks for me to like completely turn around. And so I was like, let's pilot it with a group of like 100 people. And majority of them had those transformations within 3 weeks. They were like, holy cow, like I was like on my couch all day and now I'm like running up and down my stairs and I'm cleaning my house. And so I was like, okay, this is great. And then we ended up releasing it to more people with time and time again to really reset that cortisol pattern to basically let the body know that it's safe and it's okay and to kind of get onto that whole healthy cortisol pattern again. And it's the beautiful thing about it, it's like it's a very easy thing to do where it doesn't require a lot of I guess like those intense lifestyle interventions. And so it kind of the protocol kind of brought me out of like motherhood, extended maternity leave slash retirement for like 4 years, where I was like, all right, I'm not going to write another book. And then I ended up writing the book, The Adrenal Transformation Protocol, based on the results that many of the wonderful women in my community had.
And what perfect timing, like I love how all your books sort of follow your thyroid healing journey, which has been really cool. And for the record, my son also didn't read that book about sleeping at 3 months old. And I mean, we got a sleep coach, and I had read like the same thing. Oh, by 2 months, no. For me, it was as soon as I was done breastfeeding around 1 year, then he slept through the night. And I wish somebody would have told me that. So for all the new moms out there, that's a little, note for you. But also you really speak to that kind of catch 22 of being a new mom, or like you mentioned, being a thyroid advocate. Sometimes the demands of life, doing our important work in the world, being there for the people and purposes that matter most, pull from us, and we have to find that balance. And I think it's such a strength that we gain when we become, parents, where it's like, this has to be simple. It's like
Yeah.
my recipes, they have to be just quick, easy, doable, no fuss. I'm not trying to impress anybody with fancy recipes anymore. It's just got to be like, we need to get food on the table that everyone will eat. So anyway, just kind of thinking of, your protocol in that parallel of, this is something that's doable for people. And I know people are so relieved to hear, like, I can still have my coffee,
Mm.
know? But maybe we could talk about that a little bit, the caffeine part, and how that plays into the adrenals. Can we kind of maybe tap into that topic a little bit more so people can understand like where some of the risks and considerations are, and maybe how you approach that in your adrenal transformation protocol?
For sure. So, caffeine can actually stimulate our cortisol release and it can block some of our receptors, like our adenosine receptors. It could impact them to the point where we don't feel tired, even though we are tired. And for some people, this is sort of why they drink it, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it helps me get out of bed in the morning. It helps me get things done. Now, the trouble I think becomes when we drink it too late or too much of it for our own body. That might be 3 cups of coffee for one person. That might be a sip of coffee for like looking at coffee for another person. It just really depends. That can actually mess with our circadian rhythm. It can mess with our cortisol output. It can prevent us from sleeping well at night. I know personally, I used to be able to drink caffeine at like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night for like a nightcap and be just fine. I think the day I turned 40 or like the day I turned 30, maybe 38, it was like, nope. If you look at a caffeine after 3:01, like you're going to be up the whole night, sister. And so, the way that I really treat the caffeine thing in the adrenal transformation program is we identify that caffeine is a way that we self-medicate ourselves. And so oftentimes people are using caffeine to get themselves going. And then at nighttime, they might be using something like wine to help themselves wind down, right? Because they're just out of balance and out of whack. And so rather than telling people to like give up caffeine. And I believe me, I used to do that to people. I'd be like, "You can't sleep at night, give up caffeine." And they're like, "Now I can't sleep." And now I'm like, now I'm like miserable throughout the day. Like, thank you. And it's like, okay, well, this is actually usually people use caffeine doesn't necessarily cause adrenal issues unless you're using a ton of it. Caffeine is sort of something we do to mask adrenal issues, like to self-medicate ourselves. And so the first thing we do in the program is we create more energy. And we do that through exposing the body to sufficient sunshine or bright therapy lights if you don't live in like Texas. In Texas or, where I live now, you can just step outside and you're like, okay, I've got sunshine like for most of the year. Other parts of the world, you might use a light therapy lamp just to give your body that message that it's time to rise and shine. A lot of us, we spend time in our lovely homes and they have windows, and some of the windows are, I think the newer homes, they like put special tints in them so they even let it like they're more energy efficient, right? So they let less light in, and that means that our brain, which has been wired to respond to the sunshine and for thousands and thousands of years, it doesn't get that message that it's time to rise and shine. And then we also make sure that people are not exposed to bright lights after sunset. So this might look like turning down the lights in the evening, have an evening routine, doing less screen time, wearing special glasses, or using using special screens that block out the blue light. And then we also support the body with like mitochondrial support. So I really love utilizing carnitine that can help produce the energy in the mitochondria. And then also looking at what kind of foods can give us energy in the morning. One of the ones I really like using is the Adrenal Kickstart. And this is essentially going to be some orange juice, organic orange juice, that's going to help to raise our blood sugar, which then in turn raises our morning cortisol. And then we're going to put a little bit of sea salt and a little bit of protein powder and some coconut milk to help balance out the adrenals. And so it doesn't, when we just drink pure orange juice, it can send us on a blood sugar roller coaster. When we combine it with protein and fat, you do get a little bit of rise, but it's a healthier rise and it's a more gradual blood sugar rise. And so these are the things we kind of put in place first before we even talk about touching caffeine. At some point, I do recommend people shrink their caffeine windows. So if you wake up in the morning and you crawl to your coffee machine, no judgment, I've been there as a new mom, and then like have coffee first thing in the morning, that doesn't give your body the opportunity to make its own cortisol. And so the body can become dependent on that. And so what that looks like is you wake up and then you get some sunshine and you have some food, and then you give your body a little bit of time before you drink your caffeine. And then we also shrink the time that we are exposed to caffeine. So maybe if you're drinking, I don't know, espresso at 6 p.m., maybe we start moving that back. And for many people, 3 p.m. seems to be the magic cutoff time. But I know people that are like, if I look at coffee after 12 noon, then I'll have issues. And so we really think about like, yes, you can have a caffeine, but how do we create like a healthy relationship with it so that you enjoy it, but you're not like dependent on it?
Mhm. I love all these strategies, and that drink sounds so yummy.
It's really good. It tastes like an orange creamsicle. So it's a lot of the times the people that go through the program, they're like, I really look forward to that. And I really look forward to doing a lot of the activities. And the activities are meant to like, they're actually pleasurable activities. There's like a theory in psychology that one of the ways to overcome depression is to schedule pleasurable activities throughout your days. And I used to work in mental health with various psychologists and counselors and psychiatrists for quite some time. And I remember this was like a really powerful healing modality where it's like you just do things that give you pleasure and it just works wonders. And sometimes we just need that permission with, like you said, we can take on so many responsibilities, whether that's taking care of our aging parents or caring for our young children, or some individuals might have special needs children that just require extra, or running a business or whatever, life throws at us. Sometimes that can take a lot from us, and we end up with like this big pile of responsibilities, but not a lot of time to feed our soul.
Yeah, and then we're just constantly trying to pull from an empty bucket. And I love
Exactly.
that you put that so beautifully, like just how pleasurable it is to do those self-care practices and how much they are proven to like move the needle. They really do make a difference. And I think that's such a common like cultural uh, you know, um, unhealthy belief or misconception that it's selfish to do those self-care things, but you got to think about how can you be there for anyone else if you're not doing those things? And I also, another thing I think about is how about modeling this for our friends, for our kids, for our peers? Like, hey, this is how you stay healthy in 2024. We can't just constantly be like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of a attitude. And that is a recipe, especially amongst high achieving women. It's a recipe for burnout and something that we have to kind of learn to manage. So so many great, practical ways there to, kind of ba find balance, restore balance so that we can do the things we want to do and continue to do the things we want to do versus like hitting that adrenal dysfunction wall. But I want to kind of go back to something you said a little bit ago about you were when you first started on this journey and you were looking at information on this, and it was like Mayo Clinic or something was like adrenal fatigue isn't a real thing. You hear like adrenal dysfunction, adrenal fatigue. It's often dismissed by conventional medicine. And how can you kind of maybe clarify that concept for us and explain how do we organize that? Like what's the deal there?
For sure. So one of the things that was a hot topic in functional medicine is like leaky gut, right? And then
Mhm.
if you go to a conventional medical doctor, they'll tell you that leaky gut doesn't exist. But if you look up intestinal permeability, which is like the scientific term for leaky gut, into the scientific medical journals, guess what? There's like thousands and thousands of articles on that, and it's been tied to autoimmune disease and irritable bowel syndrome and a whole host of other kinds of health conditions. Now, with adrenal fatigue, similar situation. So, to give you a little bit of history on it, it was that well, the term was originally coined by a naturopathic doctor, James Wilson, who used it to describe a cluster of symptoms that he was seeing in his patients. And this was like that morning fatigue, that irritability, the brain fog, pain in their bodies, just feeling of sluggishness, and so on and so forth. And he called it adrenal fatigue because they were, fatigued. And his theory was, I don't know what evidence he had for this. I think maybe some cortisol testing that he did was that people's adrenal glands were physically unable to make cortisol. And so this isn't necessarily what happens in this condition. What actually happens is it's kind of like, you could equivalent it to like type 1 diabetes versus insulin resistance, right? So like in insulin resistance, it's not like your pancreas isn't able to make insulin, right? It's just basically there's a communication breakdown. And so the the thing is with adrenal fatigue, different professionals have studied it with those clusters of symptoms. It's actually known as hypothalamic pituitary axis dysfunction. And what it essentially is, it's like the communication breakdown between the brain and the adrenals. The adrenals can make cortisol, but the brain pathway of like sensing stress, when we sense stress, we make cortisol kind of gets shut down because at one point you were flooded with so much cortisol and so much stress that your body was like trying to compensate and being like, okay, no, we're not gonna put out tons of cortisol every single time. But again, the term hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction is something you can look into PubMed and you can find that correlates with trauma, stress. Psychologists have actually done a lot of research on this. Sometimes they call it burnout, which is like kind of the same thing. And then hypocortisolism, which is kind of an awkward word, is another term that's been clinically studied. And I'm just like, seriously, like I scratch my head sometimes and I'm like, I took a class in medical terminology in pharmacy school, and I'm just like it would say like this means that, and I'm like, do people just not make those connections? And I think they get really caught up in the semantics. But for anybody listening, like, yeah, this is absolutely real. It's not in your head. This is something that you can help yourself with by using a lot of like lifestyle interventions. Some people do need more significant interventions. There might be different supplements or even hormones that might be required to get a person back into balance. Sometimes medications, but for the most part, it is something that is real, and it is something that you can get better from.
That gives a lot of people a lot of hope, I'm sure. Hey, Thyroid Thrivers, Jenny here. I just want to pop in with a quick message that if you're listening to today's show and thinking, I'm ready to learn more about this thyroid healing journey, about what foods to eat, what foods to avoid, one of the best ways to do it is to sign up for my free thyroid-friendly grocery guide. This features over 130 delicious, colorful, nutrient-dense foods we can eat. So this list is gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, refined sugar-free, and free of processed foods. Because there can be a lot of emphasis, especially when we're starting out, on all that we can't have and all that we're supposed to avoid. But really, the purpose of thyroid-friendly eating is to incorporate more of the good stuff. So to grab your copy instantly of the Thyroid Friendly Grocery Guide, you can go to hypothyroidchef.com/grocery. I'll send you the guide and you'll also get put on my free weekly newsletter. So you'll get fresh recipes, you'll get updates on the podcast, you'll get personal notes from me, special discounts, and all kinds of goodies that I send out to my mailing list for free just once a week. So go ahead and grab that at hypothyroidchef.com/grocery. Okay, back to the show. I'm curious when you're talking to patients, what are some of the, and I know we've kind of touched on this already, but what are some of the kind of textbook red flags that come up where you're like, oh, I think this adrenal dysfunction might be an issue here?
Definitely, if they have morning fatigue and trouble waking up in the morning, that's going to be a big red flag for me. If they are the kind of people that have trouble falling asleep at night or they feel wired or tired, that's going to be another big red flag. If they say that they wear sunglasses all the time, that's going to be like, oh, okay, so you step outside and you need sunglasses. Okay, that tells me that you are in this dysfunction state because your eyes should be able to adjust if you are healthy and balanced. The irritability test is another one. I know when my adrenals need a little bit of love, like everybody annoys me. I used to have this like really cute dog, and I'd be like, the dog is so annoying. And I'd be like, oh wait, yeah, this is it. This is me, right? Um, and then another one would be like the I just ate a whole bag of chips syndrome. So if you have a lot of salt cravings,
Hmm.
if you just keep putting more salt on your foods, that can be a sign. If you are like very easily startled, if you get up and then feel lightheaded when you get up from a sitting or laying down position quickly, that's going to be a big sign. And then some of the other things are going to be like brain fog, pain, libido issues, anxiety, fatigue, mood dysfunction too. So if having some depression, these are going to be additional things too.
All right. The thing with the adrenals and thyroid, it's like, you often hear them described as like they can be besties or they can be frenemies. How do you describe that relationship between the thyroid and the adrenal and that connection of they're either going to pull each other towards function or dysfunction, it seems like.
That's such a great way of putting it. And there's definitely a feedback loop there. And so when we have low thyroid, our adrenals are going to compensate and we're going to have, or our body's going to compensate, I should say. And so we're going to have more cortisol sticking around. When we get on thyroid meds, for example, then we can have that cortisol clearance normalize, and that can sometimes reveal low cortisol. And then we can have different levels of cortisol impact our reverse T3 production. So we can have higher levels of reverse T3 when we're under a lot of stress and our body's putting out that cortisol too. So it's always like an intricate feedback loop where I think, you really have to care for both in majority of the cases. I would say more than 90% of the people that I've worked with and tested or, somebody else tested and I just saw their results of their adrenals is they had some kind of a dysfunctional state. Sometimes their cortisol was too high, sometimes it was bouncing all over the place, and sometimes their cortisol was too low.
I appreciate too that you brought up, the medication piece and treating your thyroid. I think that's something I always talk about early on with my coaching clients. It's like, where are you at with your medication? How are you feeling? When was the last time you were tested? Because optimizing those thyroid meds and helping our body get what it needs in that regard has such a positive domino effect with so many other hormones, it seems like.
Absolutely. And I know sometimes people that are like very interested in natural medicine, they might be a little bit resistant to taking thyroid
Right.
hormones. And I feel like you can, in the early stages, you can do some things to help your thyroid hormones like naturally recalibrate. So you can do like red light therapy or low level laser therapy. You can eliminate some of those triggers. You can do something like selenium and myo-inositol. There are strategies that we can use to help bring that thyroid function into balance. But majority of the people, by the time they're diagnosed and their TSH is so high, they're so out of balance, it's sort of like, you thyroid tissue can regenerate to a degree, but it kind of can do it on its own pace and very slowly. Where if you've got like 80% of your thyroid gland damaged, like your best bet is going to be to take thyroid hormones because that's going to be the quickest way to get your hormones up to where they need to be so every other system in your body can function properly. Thyroid hormones impact like every system and cell in the body. And so my goal for people, like I'm like a agnostic when it comes to like treatments. It's like whatever makes you feel best. And for a majority of my people, like yes, having thyroid hormones is going to be the key to getting rid of that brain fog and fatigue and maybe some of that hair loss for many people. And I'm also a big advocate of like, don't put all of your faith in thyroid hormones too, because sometimes there's other systems that are out of balance that we need to focus on and to truly like look at a whole person and really get you feeling like 100% human. Oftentimes we do need to address a few different patterns.
Here, here. I mean, gosh, you just summed that up like just you hit the nail on the head. Thank you for that. Yeah, because it's, it's like a lot of people feel like medication isn't natural, and I completely understand the distrust in the, big pharma.
Yeah,
On the other hand, like if you need glasses, wear glasses, so you can see. There's no
absolutely.
shame in taking thyroid medication if it's needed. And actually, if you deny your body that, you could really be kind of getting in your own way of thriving and helping your body get to where it's like, how can we even make the healthy meals and do the healthy lifestyle stuff if we don't have the energy to get ourselves out of bed in the morning? So I don't know. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate how you put that. I think it's an important message for this community to hear. So, and I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So I am really curious to hear more about like the adrenal transformation protocol. Like, can you kind of walk us through that? I know we've touched on a lot of the little bit of the, caffeine, a little bit of lifestyle stuff. Can you kind of walk us through what that looks like?
Of course. So one of the things that drives stress is going to be we focus on what drives stress and that disruption. And so one of the fastest ways to get into adrenal dysfunction is going to be sleep deprivation. So we really focus on having a healthy circadian rhythm. That's a big part of it. Inflammation is another big driver. Oftentimes this comes from foods. And so we focus on eliminating the common reactive foods. Gluten, dairy, and soy are some of the biggies. And then we also focus on sometimes the inflammation, especially in people with autoimmunity, this could be coming from the gut. So we do utilize some gut balancing strategies. We might use something like Saccharomyces boulardii to help replenish the gut and try to overcome some of the infections. Naturally, the Saccharomyces boulardii raises our secretory IgA levels so that we are more resistant to infections. And sometimes this alone can clear some of those infections that our bodies are meant to clear anyway, but for whatever reason, there may be lingering because our immune system is a little bit out of whack with autoimmunity. And then we really focus on blood sugar balance. That's going to be a big part of the program. And so we're eating generally more protein and fat and fewer carbs compared to the standard American diet. We're also focusing on that, like, really sending your body these safety signals of like, when we live in our day-to-day lives, sometimes this there's so many stress signals coming at us, whether that's watching a scary movie or the news is bad, or we're in a rush to get somewhere. And so we're really trying to reframe that. And we start incorporating some of these like pleasurable activities. So a lot of times I have homework for people where it's like, go browse at a store or go get a massage or go do whatever makes you feel really, really good. I have people fill out like an inventory of like, this is what makes me feel better. This is what makes me feel worse. And they go through and they're like, okay, let's try to do less of the worse and let's try to do more of the better. And we try to incorporate that in a day-to-day basis. Some people do art, they make art, or I don't know, they play music. I've had so many incredibly interesting women in the program, and it's amazing to see what things they come up with that bring them that joy and pleasure. And we really work on mindset too. So we focus on rewiring the thought patterns. So stress could also come from our own brains. I know I've told my husband in the past, I'm so stressed out by this. And he's like, nope, but I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And he's like, nobody's telling you to do it. Like it's self-induced, right? And so sometimes that's the case for a lot of people with autoimmunity. That can be very much self-induced or self-driven. I know I've talked to women that have said things like, I hate my body so much, or, I can't look at myself. I'm so X, Y, and Z, or I'm terrible. And it's like, no, let's like really rewire those thought patterns because this is sending a stress signal in your body. And so we really just focus on doing things that give you a lot of pleasure and rewiring that stress response. That's a big part of it. And then, of course, we utilize fun things like adrenal adaptogens and magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin C to really help with supporting your body. I always say like adrenal adaptogens don't make you feel better or don't make you any different, but they make everybody in the world much less annoying, right? Like that's always my joke for people that are like, I don't know, I feel fine. I'm like, are you sure? Like, do you
Uh-huh.
find everybody annoying? It's like, okay, yes, let's get you some adaptogens.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about adaptogens, around this topic, because there's quite a bit I find of conflicting information about which adaptogens are okay for thyroid patients and which aren't. And what's your take on that?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I will say that adaptogens can be very bio-individual, and they can vary with like the time of life that you're in. For example, maca might be great for some women in perimenopause. There might be Vitex is another one that's great in perimenopause, and there might be other ones, Eulethro, that are better for perhaps women that are not in that time period. With the main precautions that I have with adaptogens is licorice can raise your blood pressure. And so if you have high blood pressure, you do need to avoid licorice. If you have high cortisol, you should also avoid licorice as well because licorice is known to stretch our cortisol levels, which can be great if you have low cortisol, not so great if you have high cortisol. So that's very important and relevant. The one that I think gets a lot of, I guess, has a lot of controversy around it, which I'm just not necessarily on board with, is ashwagandha. A lot of times people will say that thyroid patients can't take it because it's a nightshade. And I will say, like, not everybody that has Hashimoto's needs to be like on autoimmune paleo diet
Mhm.
that is nightshade free. And definitely, even if you do need to be on that diet, you do not need to be on it for the rest of your life. So it's if you are nightshade sensitive, then yes, ashwagandha could potentially be an issue. But a lot of people, I was never somebody that had nightshade sensitivities, for example. So um, a lot of people, some people are, some people aren't, right? So it just depends on your individual body. But I think that's where the controversy comes from.
Mm.
Ashwagandha, interestingly, has been studied in thyroid conditions and it has been studied to help them. So it is something that um, generally for most people is okay. But again, of course, you do need to see how they impact you individually. Um, Breastfeeding moms, I would say I would not do like an adrenal blend of like 6 to 8 adaptogens. Some of them can suppress milk supply. Some of them can increase milk supply, which can be bad or good. Some of them can cross into the breast milk. And then I would do something like a holy basil tea or something very gentle, just one adaptogen at a time.
Oh, I love holy basil. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
that
it's super
clarity.
gentle.
Yeah, yeah. I like that as I drink that Tulsi tea in the afternoon a lot of times, but thank you for that
Same.
clarity. Yeah, that's so helpful. You mentioned nightshades, and I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but I would love if we could maybe talk a little bit about our favorite subject on Thyroid Healthy Bites, food, and how food comes into play here with adrenals, like as playing a supporting role, and maybe how are there ways that it can undermine our adrenal balance?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely my approach with the adrenals is making sure we have enough protein and fat to support blood sugar balance. Too many carbohydrates can send us on a blood sugar roller coaster. I know the continuous glucose monitor has come out the last few years, and it's been such a big game changer for people to see like what is actually happening when you eat food. Like, what is it doing to your blood sugar, and how do you modify that response, right? Do you change the food? Do you change the order in which you're eating the food? Are you utilizing digestive enzymes, apple cider vinegar, or maybe some fiber? So that's a very relevant part of healing for, in my experience, is that blood sugar balance piece and
Hmm.
really focusing on that. The other part is like that inflammatory piece is which foods are causing inflammation in your body. And that's very individual for people, of course, but there are some, I guess, um, common denominators, right? And gluten, dairy, and soy being the three most common foods that I see. Some people can also be sensitive to like eggs or grains or corn, nightshades that we already talked about, nuts and seeds, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, you mentioned soy, and I've really been wanting to ask you about that because I feel like there's been a lot of maybe new thinking, or the thing I feel like amongst some thyroid experts the thinking is changing a bit about soy, where it used to be more of a that's really kind of a no-go, it's best to avoid. Now it's like, well, maybe, some of the benefits for those who are not sensitive to it, maybe the benefits outweigh the risks. Where's your thinking at on soy these days?
So in my experience, so there's not a lot of research on soy and dairy in particular being problematic for people with thyroid issues. The where that I get my data is through doing food sensitivity tests on people, and I still do see those foods as common reactive foods. I think if somebody were to eat like raw dairy their entire lives, maybe they would have been fine and not sensitized. If somebody was eating fermented non-GMO soy their entire lives and not processed soy, then they would be fine as well. And there's also like a certain time period. If you are off of a food for a time period, you might be just fine with it. So you might no longer be sensitive to it. I know there's some benefits in women's health and hormonal health. I would say in my experience, a lot of the people that I've worked with do better off of it, at least in the beginning, because it can increase their thyroid antibodies and it can increase um, some like anxiety, irritability symptoms that I've noticed. Generally speaking, this has been in the beginning of their healing journeys. I would say at some point, like gluten would be the most important thing to avoid after a time period. And then for dairy, I know some people have gotten it back where they no longer are sensitive to it. I know personally, I had this, um, I was utilizing some lactation supplements and some other things, and all of a sudden I was no longer dairy sensitive. And I've tried a similar protocol on a few of my family members first and then clients. And so utilizing, and I was taking like 10 different supplements. I was like, which one was it, right? And it ended up being carnitine and alfalfa used together that reversed my dairy sensitivity. And it's done that for other people as well. So I feel like, yeah, I mean, the science and is always evolving, and my experience is always evolving, as I'm sure is yours and a lot of the other experts in the field. I'm still kind of like if you're starting off, like you better be off of gluten and dairy just to be on the safe side, but maybe with some time and if you're not sensitive, you can introduce those foods back and just definitely watch to see how you react to them, right?
Yeah, that is so interesting. Yes, that has been my experience with dairy, which, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for because I used to be a cheesemonger in my 20s and at this, bougie grocery store in
Mm.
Seattle. And I love cheese. And it was so heartbreaking for me when I was like, I have to give up dairy. And now I've found I can tolerate certain kinds of cheese, especially aged raw milk cheeses. Um, but you mentioned carnitine, which you inspired me to start with. And I've been doing that for, gosh, the last probably 18 months or so.
Ooh.
And I feel like it's really helping me. Um, but I didn't know that about possibly like with your experience of it helping you be able to tolerate dairy again. But yeah, and soy, I'm kind of tinkering with that too as I just turned 48, kind of coming into more amplified perimenopause symptoms, and like, well, let's see if maybe this is going to be a help to me. Um, I'm not, publishing recipes necessarily yet with tofu, but just on my own, kind of trying some of that at home. But I think with soy too, there's so many highly, highly processed
Yeah.
forms of soy that it's like I'm not even that's not even in my, thoughts around like what I would cook with. I'm thinking more of just like organic tofu, maybe
Yeah.
some edamame, a little bit of tamari sauce, things like that. Um, but I really appreciate your take on that. And yeah, so that's super interesting. Um, okay. Well, gosh, this has been so informative, Dr. Wentz. I so appreciate having you on the show. Is there anything that, any parting thoughts you'd want to share with the listeners today about maybe just how we can support ourselves to be resilient, live an adrenal friendly lifestyle?
Ah, so good. I think, the important thing is checking in with yourself and just making sure that, life changes. And, we were just talking about our kids, like life can move so fast ahead of you. I have a 6-year-old. Last time we spoke, I barely had a 1-year-old, right?
Right.
Um, and sometimes it's just really easy to get caught up in life without checking in to make sure that you're okay and that you're actually living the life that you want to be living and what your, I guess, vision for yourself is. And sometimes that requires taking a pause and doing an inventory and then putting in some of those things that can really help you. I saw this quote somewhere and I was like, this is so much like about the adrenals. And it said, you're not tired because you're doing too much. You're tired because you're not doing enough of the right things and or not doing enough of the things that give you energy. And I think that's so, so relevant. So if you're doing a lot of things and they're just draining you, that's a really important consideration.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love the distinction you made there too between like we talk a lot about mindfulness and meditation and stress management, right? Which can feel kind of like getting your workouts in. It's like a thing to add to the
Yep.
list.
Yep.
But you made this distinction of the things that really just make you happy and bring you joy and fill you up. For me, I know it's skiing, mountain biking. It's I want to feel the wind in my hair. I want that like positive adrenaline rush. That's just like I feel alive and so grateful to be like in nature, having this adventure with people I love. Like that is to me, that's like I feel I can just feel it in me just talking about it. So I think that to me is for my own journey and maybe for the listeners too, I think is such a wonderful nugget to, take from our conversation today too. Think about those things that put you in that flow state that make you feel so happy. You're just like, yes, you know. Yeah.
Petting puppies, right?
Yes. Yeah, puppy.
Lots of cute puppies, like just whatever it is, and it's different for
Yeah.
everybody, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got people in my community who are amazing quilters, or they're into dance, or, there's just, we all have, it's one of the beautiful things about us that makes us unique is we all have different things that fill us up that way. So it's a fun thing to think about, and, powerful to frame it in a way that this is a piece of our wellness plan. This is a piece of how we stay healthy and whole for the long haul. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a joy.
For the listeners, you can check out Dr. Wentz's book, The Adrenal Transformation Protocol, a 4-week plan to release stress symptoms and go from surviving to thriving. You can check that out anywhere books are sold. And you've also got a free gift that I know the listeners are going to love. It includes a gluten-free recipe booklet, a thyroid diet quick start guide, and a free chapter from your Hashimoto's Root Cause book, which is one of my most recommended books to my community for sure. But I will be sure and put that link in the show notes for the listeners so all of you can go ahead and download Dr. Wentz's freebie. Always a pleasure to see you, Dr. Wentz. Thank you again so much for being here with us today and for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for spending this time with me and tuning into today's episode of the Thyroid Healthy Bites podcast. If you've enjoyed today's show, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. Your support makes this show possible. For more thyroid healthy food and lifestyle inspiration, check out my free library of thyroid-friendly recipes and lifestyle content at hypothyroidchef.com and the Hypothyroid Chef YouTube channel. As we wrap it up, head to the show notes for information and links to everything we talked about today, along with the link to my free thyroid-friendly grocery guide download. I'm Ginny Mahar, your thyroid health and cooking coach, wishing you happy cooking, happy thriving, and the best of health. See you next time.